What's up, everybody? Nate here. Oil, gas, energy. I feel like this intro belongs more in an episode of Avatar or something. But what do those three things have in common? Well, they're getting way more expensive right now. Now, we've talked a lot about on this channel about how oil and gas prices and energy prices in the United States are going through the roof. And we've talked about all the factors that might keep them that way for the extended future. So I feel like I've told you pretty much all that there is to know about that right now. But with energy and gas prices going up so rapidly in the United States right now, is the country or the world doing anything to kind of alleviate some of that pressure? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. I want to go over the 5 things that are kind of in the works right now to try to bring down some of these super high gas and energy prices, not just in the United States, but across the world. We're also going to talk about how long gas prices and energy prices might continue to go up in the United States. And I promise no more Avatar references. Okay, maybe 1 or 2. But before I get into all of that, do me a quick favor and hit smash or destroy that thumbs up button below and ring that notification bell too. Both of those 2 things are completely free and they help to show me that you like this video and that you want to see even more just like it. Thank you so much for doing that. Now let's talk about what is going on with these gas prices in the United States. So for all of you EV fiends out there, this doesn't necessarily apply to you as much, but the rest of us have had to go to the gas pump over the last few months. And that has not been a pleasant experience. Around mid-February 2022, gas prices pretty much exploded. Oil went from around $90 a barrel all the way up to well over $130 in the span of just a couple weeks. That meant that gas prices also jumped by around 50 to 60 cents on average throughout the country. That has led companies and governments all throughout the world to try to figure out how they can take some of the pressure off of their citizens and consumers. Let's start with here at home. What is the United States currently doing to try to bring down some of these gas prices in our own country? In his State of the Union address just a couple weeks ago, President Joe Biden said he would start taking out around 50 to 60 million barrels of oil from the United States reserves every single week. That might sound like a lot, but in reality, the United States uses around 15 to 20 million barrels of oil every single day. So he basically just bought us a couple weeks. Come on, Joe! And honestly, there's not really much the President of the United States and the federal government can do about our current gas price problems. Most of the gas that is produced in the United States or abroad is done by private companies. And of course, the United States has no control over what other countries do with their oil supply. But here at home, President Joe Biden has kind of flip-flopped on the issue of oil since he became president. He's kind of spearheaded the movement that the United States needs to move away from oil. And while that's most likely a better plan for the long-term health of the United States, right now we are definitely feeling the pressure. So you haven't had private companies producing as much because of some of the policies and restrictions that the president and the federal government has put into place. I will say they're not completely restrictive. There is still a ton of oil contracts that are available for businesses to pick up to start mining more. But what you got to remember is it's not exactly a switch. So even if they do start to produce more, it's gonna take a while for them to meet up with demand. So with that being said, let's talk about the first thing that the United States is trying to do in order to lower gas prices in our country. And this one isn't so much to lower, but to help out consumers by giving them some extra cash. The United States federal government and President Joe Biden are actually considering gas cards to give out to the American public. Now, they haven't really talked much about how this would actually work, but essentially they would send out prepaid cards to American citizens that you can use at local gas stations. Right off the bat, that would immediately take off some of the pressure from Americans because now they're not spending their own money when they fuel their cars, they're gonna spend Uncle Sam's money. But that is where we start running into some issues because Uncle Sam's money, while it might seem unlimited, printing more and using more of it can actually cause some big issues. You see, over the last 2 years, from 2020 till now, the United States government has printed a ton of money. We're talking multi-trillions of dollars on stimulus bills and assistance to the American public. That was all in response to the pandemic, and what they're really worried about is printing printing even more money and causing inflation to go up even higher, which is also a big issue in our country right now. I mean, because gas prices are so high, you'd essentially have to give people hundreds of dollars on these cards in order for them to go out and fuel their vehicles. So we're talking hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion more dollars that need to be created out of thin air, which is only going to make inflation go up because now there's way more money in circulation. So that's the first problem. The second is some obvious things like fraud. I mean, how exactly is this going to work? How are they going to check to make sure that every single citizen has their own card? Are they going to be linked somehow to social security numbers? Are they just going to have an address on them? What happens if they get stolen? Right now, the federal government is still kind of knocking around a bunch of different ideas when it comes to how they're going to tackle this energy crisis in the United States. That was definitely one of them. But the other comes back to businesses, which brings us to number 2, taxes. More specifically, more taxes, and more taxes for the big oil companies. Right now, the federal government and Congress is looking into taxing these big oil companies more on some of the massive profits that they're making because oil prices are so high right now. I mean, literally, because a barrel of oil is going for well over $100 right now, and that's more than usual, these oil companies are bringing in a huge profit. ExxonMobil made around $33 billion in 2021 alone, and BP ended up bringing in around 12.6 billion, and it's also increased its forecast for 2022 to be around $15.6 billion. So basically how this would work is that these big oil companies would start paying the United States government a lot more in taxes, and then that money would be reallocated back to the United States public in one way or another. The idea is to take some of the burden off of regular American consumers and put more pressure on the oil companies who are making a killing while people are having to spend a lot more money. And the reason being is because a lot of people in the United States consider oil to be something that is necessary, especially to fuel our vehicles. I mean, the way the United States is built, you can't exactly get around gas prices being so high. Most Americans have to drive somewhere, whether it's to the store or to work. So it's a necessity, and Congress is considering extra bills to put more taxes on that necessity for the big businesses. And they're not alone, because the UK is also considering similar taxes in their parliament. Now for this, it's not really sure how it would work. It's not really sure how they would tax the profits of a particular company, because companies' profits are going to vary depending on the need for that specific good. Of course, right now, profits for oil are super high because prices are really high, and there's a really short supply of it, so they have to make gas prices even higher. However, where does Congress really draw the line at? Some experts have said around $120 a barrel, because if it's more than that, then that's way too expensive for the average American consumer. Anything under that would be taxed at the normal rate. And of course, that's all speculative because we don't really know what the price of oil is going to be in the future. And I imagine this is not going to be a problem once we have a lot of the global issues start to calm down. I mean, if that was to happen and we start to see oil go back down to around $80 to $90 a barrel, well, that's pretty on par with what it was before. So bills like that really wouldn't matter, even though gas prices are getting more expensive. But the United States has found ways to get creative with taxes before. So it wouldn't surprise me if we did start to see some type of tax on big oil companies in the future. Speaking of the United States getting creative, it has one potential solution to our current oil issues. I mean, if Americans can't afford gas, then maybe they just shouldn't buy it. Literally. This is what the International Energy Agency is saying to the United States and the rest of the world right now. And basically what the advice comes down to is just drive less. So work from home and do everything else that you can without using a car. And with this, I kind of understand where they're coming from, because basically you have a supply and demand problem right now in the energy market. You have way more people that need and rely on gasoline and oil than there is actual supply of it. Now, of course, how do you really fix the supply and demand problem? Well, you can bring down demand or you can increase supply. We are starting to increase supply here in the United States, and other countries throughout the world are starting to increase supply as well. But in the short term, term, if you bring down demand, well, then gas prices will ultimately have to level out. So in their opinion, if you can get as many Americans as possible to start working from home and having their kids go to school from home, just like we saw in the pandemic, then in theory, we won't need as much gas or oil and prices will go down in the United States. Now, personally, I don't think that's really a feasible solution because the only reason we saw gas prices go so low during the pandemic is because we were being forced to stay at home because of economic lockdowns. Nothing was really open and businesses were telling their employees to work from home. Now it's a little bit different. We don't have wide-scale economic lockdowns, so people aren't being forced to stay at home. They're able to travel and go to work, and their kids can go back to school. And the fact of the matter is, you are not going to convince millions of Americans to not drive their cars. Now, one thing the International Energy Agency did suggest here is that countries like the United States need to put a lot more time and energy into public transportation. So cities and governments need to kind of create and rework their cities so that way people can walk or bicycle all throughout them. Or you just have public transit like trains that go through your major cities, and in some cases, states. That way there's a lot less need for gas stations and gas in general because everybody is using public transit or just walking. And me personally, I've noticed this throughout the entire United States. The US was built for cars, which makes a lot of sense considering our history with the automobile. I mean, just in Michigan in particular, you have to drive everywhere. I know anytime I go to downtown Detroit, the city is not exactly walkable. You gotta have a car, and a car is something that pretty much everybody needs in the US. But again, that's not really a short-term solution because that's something that, while it's in the work for a lot of cities, it's gonna take years for that to happen. I mean, we're talking a complete rebuilding of our entire country's infrastructure. And by that point, we might all be completely converted over into EVs anyway, so there might not be a high demand for gas in the United States to begin with. And next up, we have the complete opposite side of this coin. So the IEA wants people to drive less, drive slower, and try to rely more on public transportation. That way you don't need as much gas in the United States. However, we could also boost production, and this is exactly what Saudi Arabia is working on right now. They are one of the biggest oil producers in the entire world, and if they start making more of it, well then hopefully people in the United States can get more too. Saudi Arabia is currently working on a plan to invest around $50 billion into its oil capacity. Now, companies that are working with OPEC are already starting to do this. They want to increase their oil production and oil capacity by around 50% by 2030. And this is something that could be done because right now these oil companies, even abroad, are making record profits, with some of them actually doubling their profits because the price of gas and oil has nearly doubled in such a short time. Now, one thing I want to point out here is why exactly these oil companies overseas are saying that they want to increase their oil capacity and their output by around 50% over the next decade or so. I mean, isn't the entire rest of the world trying to push more towards the electric model right now? Yes, governments and countries all throughout the world are trying to push more for electricity. The problem is you can't do it all at once. But there are a couple problems with this. The first is you can't exactly do it all at once. We in the United States in particular relies so much on oil and gasoline that you can't just take it all away immediately because that would cause a catastrophic failure in our country. So you have to kind of wean the entire country off of it until everybody, for the most part, is using electric vehicles or an electric model. The other problem too is there are a lot of products that we use in the United States that require oil. To name one of the biggest ones, plastic requires oil in its production. Without it, you're kind of just left with a pile of messy goo. And that doesn't really help anybody. So we need to have oil production no matter what because these industries rely on it. And we're not just talking about the gasoline industry. So they want to continue to make more because demand for products and services that require oil is also starting to go up, not just vehicles. So oil production is being increased for all of these reasons. And hopefully if these types of investments go through, then you could see a short-term lifting of pressure, not only in the United States, but the rest of the world. And finally, let's talk about number 5, which is kind of a wake-up call for the US and the rest of the planet. So this whole energy crisis revolving oil and gas prices going through the roof has kind of made the US and other countries think, maybe we shouldn't have let oil pretty much dominate everything in our lives. Maybe maybe that was a bad idea. I mean, 100 years ago, even further back than that, oil was needed, and it was pretty much the next phase of human evolution. I mean, you needed it to power just about everything, and it was an important resource. But now in 2022, countries are figuring out that oil is not going to be around forever, and maybe we shouldn't rely as heavily on it as we do. I mean, obviously oil and gas is not going away overnight. It's going to be around for a very long time. And probably in your lifetime watching this, you will still see oil being produced. But eventually it's going to run out because it's a non-renewable resource. So planning your entire economy around it might not be a good idea, which is why the US government and governments all throughout the world are trying to figure out alternatives. Other countries like Germany and the UK are looking into heavily switching over into nuclear power. Of course, all types of energy come with problems, but the costs and the short-term solutions from nuclear and other types of energy are a lot less severe than oil. The United States too has a ton of nuclear energy, and we also are trying to switch a lot of our things over into hydroelectric and just electric in general. Not only that, but we have wind turbines all throughout the United States, power a lot of our infrastructure. And we also have solar energy that is coming in too. All of those things for the most part are renewable energy sources. So the United States can continue to use them over and over again to meet our needs. But the bigger issue that we're running into right now is it's pretty expensive to do that in the short term, and we have to completely swap over our entire country's infrastructure. Right now, we have coal plants that create electricity and then transfer that electricity to homes and businesses all throughout the country. Those are starting to go away, and what might replace them might not work in every area. For instance, you can't just slap a wind turbine in the middle of Michigan and expect it to power an entire city like we see with coal plants. Same with solar energy, because it kind of needs to be reasonably sunny to collect some of that solar. So what the US and states are trying to do right now is figure out how to generate solar power or wind energy in one area of the country or multiple, and then transferring that energy to other places. That means our electrical grid needs to be updated. And in President Joe Biden's infrastructure bill that was passed in 2021, this was addressed. The bill proposed billions of dollars to go into improving our electrical lines and electrical infrastructure in the United States. However, this is only just scratching the surface. Many experts believe that this is a multi-trillion-dollar project. So obviously that is expensive, and they can't exactly do that all at once because that requires money printing, and money printing leads to inflation. But in my opinion, you gotta start somewhere. You have to start putting those building blocks in now so they can help the long-term health of our country in general. I mean, when you look at oil, eventually it's going to go away. So having that be the long-term strategy ultimately is a losing bet. So really your only choice is to go the opposite direction, and that could definitely fail too. I mean, I'm not saying that going all electric or going all solar or wind is definitely going to be better for our country. But it might be time to try something new as gas prices continue to go up. I mean, oil and gas has such a control over our economy. It accounts for around 33% of the consumer price index, which measures how high inflation is getting every single month. That is a huge chunk, which means Americans are spending a lot of their money every single day, week, and month just on gas. If you are to bring gas prices down, well, the oil companies are obviously going to take a hit, but they're always going to be around because there's always going to be a need for oil. However, if Americans can save money on gas, then they'll have tons of other money to spend on other things, which is how our economy ultimately grows. So it's not such a bad thing. And if our infrastructure is improved to offer more public transit or more incentives for people to walk around cities, well, then people don't have to buy cars, which is another huge expense for many Americans. I mean, cars are literally just money pits. All they do is become more and more expensive over time. You gotta fill them up with gas, and then you gotta fix them if they break. And when you go to sell them, some type of profit on it. But you usually can't because used cars only go down in value. Now that's kind of changed in 2022. They've actually started to go up in value for a lot of crazy reasons, but that trend is not likely to continue for the foreseeable future. So of course, these are all just ideas, but like I said, it might be time to try something new, so that way we can start bringing down gas prices in the United States. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about what the United States and other countries throughout the world are trying to do in order to bring down gas prices for their citizens? Do you think that gas prices and oil is eventually going to come back down? Or do you think the price is only going to go up? There is nothing that countries around the world can do about it. That is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all of the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.